Hello everyone, peace be upon you all. Welcome to the sixth video where we continue to read the Oxford Handbook of Islamic Theology regarding Jahm and the Jahmites. In this video, we are going to read the counter-arguments by Cornelia against the claims of Wolfson. She says the present chapter argues that these claims are untenable. The arguments of Jahm and the Jahmites are at odds with the Church Fathers. Wolfson had claimed that the philosophic reasoning used by the Church Fathers was behind the statements of Jahm. Rather, Cornelia says that there are clear indications that they have their origin in Christian Trinitarian debates in which the Arian party argued on a logical basis against the godhead of the Son. To elaborate, Arianism is a Christological doctrine, in other words, a doctrine pertaining to the nature of Christ, whether he is God or not God, or if he is God, how godly is he? So it is a Christological doctrine considered heretical by all mainstream branches of Christianity. At the present, at least, it was not heretical at the time of its founding. It is first attributed to Arius, who has died at the year 336 AD, a Christian presbyter who preached and studied in Alexandria, Egypt. Arian theology holds that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, who was begotten by God the Father, with the difference that the Son of God did not always exist, but was begotten or made before time by God the Father. Therefore, Jesus was not co-eternal with God the Father, but nonetheless, Jesus began to exist outside time, as time applies only to the creations of God. Do not worry if you cannot entirely understand what this means, because it is nonsensical. You cannot begin to exist outside of time, and you cannot be made or begotten or begin to exist by God without being a creature of God. Anyway, Arius's Trinitarian theology, later given an extreme form by Aetius and his disciple Eunomius, and called Anomoian, asserts a total dissimilarity between the Son and the Father. This is also sometimes called New Arianism. Arianism holds that the Son is distinct from the Father and therefore subordinate to him. The term Arian is derived from the name Arius. It was not what the followers of Arius's teachings called themselves, but rather a term used by outsiders. The nature of Arius's teachings and his supporters were opposed to the theological doctrines held by Homoousion Christians regarding the nature of the Trinity and the nature of Christ. Homoousion means that God is one essence or substance and three hypostases or persons. There was a controversy between two interpretations of Jesus' divinity, Homoousionism and Arianism, based upon the theological orthodoxy of the time. One Trinitarian and the other also a derivative of Trinitarian orthodoxy, and both of them attempted to solve its respective theological dilemmas. Homoousionism was formally affirmed by the first two ecumenical councils. Since then, Arianism has been condemned as the heresy or sect of Arius. Trinitarian or Homoousion doctrines were vigorously upheld by Patriarch Athanasius of Alexandria, who insisted that Jesus, God the Son, was same in being or same in essence with God the Father. Arius stated in response, if the Father begat the Son, then he who was begotten had a beginning in existence, and from this it follows that there was a time when the Son was not. The Ecumenical First Council of Nicaea of 325, convened by Emperor Constantine to ensure church unity, declared Arianism to be a heresy. According to Everett Ferguson, the great majority of Christians had no clear views about the nature of the Trinity, and they did not understand what was at stake in the issues that surrounded it. Arianism is also used to refer to other non-Trinitarian theological systems of the 4th century, which regarded Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Logos, as either a begotten creature of a similar or different substance to that of the Father, but not identical, such as homoiousion, not homoousion, homoiousion, and anomianism or new Arianism, or as neither uncreated nor created in the sense other beings are created, as in semi-Arianism. So, we have two parties in the Christian Trinitarian debates, the Homoousians and the Arians. On one hand, we have the Church Fathers on the Homoousian side, while the Jahmis were on the Arian side. So, Muslim theologians did not derive their arguments from the Church Fathers, but from the Arians, who argued against the godhead of Christ and that the Son was subordinate to the Father. And so she says that the arguments of Jahm and the Jahmites are at odds with the Church Fathers, and that there are clear indications that they have their origin in Christian Trinitarian debates, in which the Arian party argued on a logical basis against the Godhead of the Son. We will see these indications later on. The issue in question in the inter-Muslim debates on the attributes, or sifat, of God is not whether terms predicated of God in the Quran, such as living and knowing and powerful, imply the existence in God of life and knowledge and power as real incorporeal beings, nor is it the question whether the attributes are real things in God. The contentious point, rather, is whether the Quranic attributes indicate that something is logically predicated of God, and if they do, how? In other words, it was not the philosophers who first introduced the logical aspect of the problem. Rather, the problem was always logical from the beginning. To illustrate, considering that God is one, how could one posit that there is attributes besides God? How could one posit logically that there are other beings besides God? That would be illogical. That would be a contradiction with God's oneness. And proceeding, Jahm and the Jahmites do not argue that the attributes are not things, but that God is not a thing, which does not mean that he is not real, but that nothing can be logically predicated of him, and that he cannot be described by reference to properties. Hence, according to Jahm and the Jahmites, the Quranic attributes of God do not indicate predication. In other words, considering that God is a non-thing that cannot possibly be described by reference to properties, the Quranic attributes cannot indicate predication, or else it would contradict with God's non-thingness and would make the Quran illogical. The question whether something can be logically predicated of the absolutely one or not, and whether the one can be described by reference to properties, is a logical and an ontological issue. The question whether the Quranic attributes and verbs signify logical predication is a semantic issue. The question whether something can be logically predicated of the absolutely one or not, and whether the one can be described by reference to properties, is a logical and an ontological issue. The question whether the Quranic attributes and verbs signify logical predication is a semantic issue. Let's repeat it again. So, can something be logically predicated of the absolutely one? And can the one be described by reference to properties? These questions are logical and ontological. Another question is whether the Quranic attributes and verbs signify logical predication. That is a semantic issue. We will understand these problems in detail later on. Let's continue. Arius, Aetius, and in particular the new Arian Eunomius of Cyzikus made the point that regarding God no predication is possible, and that anything said of God signifies identity in sense and reference. This point disagrees with the Church Fathers Wolfson referred to, and it is found in the theories of Jahm and the Jahmites. To understand this crucial point, we have to read the article by Cornelia Schöck. It is called The Controversy Between Al-Kindi and Yahya ibn Adi on the Trinity. Cornelia says that the Arian discussion on the ousia problem began with Arius's attack on the explanations of the substantial unity of the Father and the Son put forth by Arius's bishop Alexander of Alexandria. Interestingly, both were born around the year 250 and died around the year 336 AD. Anyway, Arius refuted Alexander's doctrine on the co-substantiality or co-essentiality of the Father and the Son by taking all possible senses or meanings of the terminology of substantial union and showing that they are all heretical or illogical. His reasoning implies that he had a pretty clear notion of what substance can mean in acceptable philosophical discussion and of the available senses of the substantial participation, equality, or identity. The 4th and 5th century historians of the Christian Church described Arius as highly skilled in dialectic discussion. Arius's arguments reflect a familiarity with the Platonic issue of the one and the many, and with Porphyrian logic, at least with the isagogy. Subsequent to Arius, the dialectical reasoning of Aetius and his disciple Eunomius has been the historically most important and influential challenge to 4th century Christian Trinitarian thought. Following in the footsteps of his master, Aetius, Eunomius became famous for his defense of absolute divine simplicity and was feared for his logical skills. He put the denial of the doctrine of the co-substantiality or co-essentiality of the Father and the Son on a demonstrative basis grounded in a theory of language and signification. Thereby he mobilized all great figures of Greek patristics of the second half of the 4th century in opposition to him. The list of treatises against Eunomius is impressive, and the production of works against him carried on in the 5th century. The force of his logical argument is reflected in the fact that his opponents saw in him a Millennian technologist, who perverted the truth of the scripture by his proper distortions and arguments. The label technologist is obviously due to Eunomius' sober reasoning according to the principles and rules of dialectic and syllogistic, as we find them explained in Alkinosis Didascalicus, Alkinos or Albinos, and the Didascalicus is a handbook on Platonism, specifically Middle Platonism. Eunomius' works have all been burnt and no copies are known. However, 3 of Eunomius' works have been preserved in whole or in part by citations and paraphrases in the refutations of his main adversaries, the Cappadocian Fathers, Basil of Caesarea and his younger brother Gregory of Nyssa. The Cappadocian Fathers, also traditionally known as the Three Cappadocians, are Basil the Great, who was born around 330 and died around 380, who was the Bishop of Caesarea. Basil's younger brother, Gregory of Nyssa, was born around 335 and died around 395, who was the Bishop of Nyssa, and a close friend, Gregory of Nazianzus, who was born around 329 and died around 389, who became Patriarch of Constantinople. The Cappadocia region in modern-day Turkey was an early site of Christian activity, with several missions by Paul in this region. The Cappadocians advanced the development of early Christian theology, for example, the doctrine of the Trinity, and are highly respected as saints in both Western and Eastern churches. The controversy between Eunomius and the Cappadocians lasted from 360 to 383. It started with Eunomius's apology, which was answered by Basil in his Against Eunomius. Eunomius replied to Basil in his apology for the apology. After Basil's death, Gregory of Nyssa responded with his Contra Eunomius to Eunomius's apology of the apology, and to Eunomius's last surviving work, the Confession of Faith. For the present context, it is of particular interest that besides other works of Basil, his refutation of Eunomius, that is Basil's Against Eunomius, has been translated into Syriac, and that two fragments of this translation are known, dating from the 8th or 9th century. These translations are pieces of evidence that Eunomius's arguments were handed down together with the counter-arguments of Basil of Caesarea in the intellectual environment of early Muslims. And with that, we reach the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and see you next time, where we continue to learn about Eunomius's arguments against the Trinity and the Cappadocians. Goodbye and peace be upon you.